What's up, and welcome into this week's edition of the Above Average Dynasty podcast on a Saturday morning. We've been doing them on the evenings. This one we're gonna try to switch and do into Saturdays and keep it going because Kulak is a morning man with a family. He can't be staying
I
up into the late evenings of the night.
I get so tired. And all those kids keep me going until far too late in the evening. So I appreciate it. This is gonna be good. It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be good, but it's gonna be weird because normally I can bring the energy, and Kulak is just trying his best to hold on, and it's gonna be a little
Might
flipped.
be
I think
reversing it today.
it's gonna be reversed. Cool. This is Kulak's natural time of the day, and I'm just kind of groggily waking up with my coffee. But I think I can manage. I know Kulak can manage.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just thinking back when I was a professional poker player, like the thought of doing being an early morning person and doing an early morning podcast on a Saturday morning would have been vile and disgusting to me. And now as I've gotten older, it feels more natural.
That's what toddlers will do to you, right? I hear that. Well, they
Yeah.
just destroy your sleep schedule, right?
Yeah, I have one who sleeps in bed with us and one who wakes up a few times during the night, and then the other one, 10% of the time has a nightmare. So it's like, yeah,
You're
they
just
destroy
you're
your
just
sleep
fucked.
schedule, something fierce.
This is not a
Hmm.
fancy topic,
Yep.
but this is a topic of a debate within my office. Do you let
Yeah.
if you have a young kid, like
Yeah.
less than like one, do you let them
Okay.
scream themselves into the night? Do you let them self soothe, or do you like try to like help that along?
That's a good question. I know it's like a hotly debated topic, and I think like the theory and the evidence goes like one decade one way, one decade the other way. I'm definitely more of a let them cry more than my wife is. One, you get tired of hearing the crying. Two, you feel bad for them. And
Yeah.
three, you realize that they're at a point in their situation that they're not going to self-soothe them to sleep. Like they do need something additional. But like if they're overly tired, then I think you have to let them try to figure it out on their own.
Once
Actually,
it
we
once you
had that happen last night.
once you figured
So
out that like sleep truly is the issue, it's not like, oh, this kid's sick, this kid has like burping, this
right.
kid needs food. It's like, okay, it's just sleep.
Yeah, especially like my kids that go to daycare and they're playing all day and they're, rambunctious and they get home and they get tired and then maybe we do something, maybe we go play outside or something, and then by the time they're ready for bed, they're kind of just like they're not quite ready for bed, but they're just overly tired. And so but yeah, I mean, it's just I mean, it's so dependent on like every kid is different and every day literally every day is completely so some days, to answer your question, some days I would let him cry, some days uh I would go in there. Just it depends, like you kind of just figure these things out as a parent, like as you go,
Interesting.
like one kid needs this, one kid doesn't, one kid needs this other thing, one kid doesn't. So
That makes sense. They're human beings, not human doings. They all have their independent personalities.
yeah, that's a good way of
I
putting
can
it.
only
Yep.
I can only imagine three little U's just fucking on a terror on the world.
I mean, you know how much I talk and how much like I always ask questions, I'm always like doing shit and always trying to like, you know like I have high energy. I'm always trying to get shit done and improve and whatever. My oldest son is just like that. He's 6 and he's always asking questions. Like he's so inquisitive, which I really do
Which
love.
is good.
But
That's
I'll tell you,
awesome.
after a full when you wake up at 5 in the morning because and you've been up all night with one of the kids, and then you work a full day and you come home and like the first 40 things that are said to you are questions that that like you should answer and want to answer, but just it's tough to summon the energy. It's funny. It's like he'll just ask me like what did he ask me the other day? It was like, where does lightning and thunder come from? And it
Wow.
was just kind of sporadic and random. And me being, I have a science background, so I really wanted to answer the question in detail, so I did. It just took a lot of mental energy to do so.
See, that's where I would be
So yeah,
like,
he's just like me.
that's one of those questions that like you can answer, but like maybe I could BS my way through it. That's where I'd just be like, okay, son, let's get you on. Let's both look on the internet to kind of well,
Yeah.
your kid's 5. You don't want to give him unfettered access to the internet to look up any question he has. So never mind. This is coming from a single bachelor, not
No,
understanding.
that's that's true though. Like, I mean, and I think that's a very reasonable, and I do that a lot of the time. Like, if I'm tired, man, it's like been a long day. I'm like, can we just YouTube video this? But sometimes, especially
Smart.
questions like that, like whenever you ask me questions about anything like science or math related, I make sure to like spend a little bit more time and energy to actually, and then he's like, what? Like 4 seconds into me explaining a topic, he's like, well, what is this? I don't understand what that means. It's like, oh God, I got to
Your kid's
Eli
gonna be
5 this
smart,
because
bro.
he's literally 5, you know?
Your kid's gonna be smart, man. That's awesome that he's asking questions.
He is. He's already he's testing into the overachiever category, which I did not have that on the bingo card. So there was like so now when we're looking for a house, we have to like look for school districts that are able to possibly accommodate a like higher, I don't even know what you call it, special needs, but the higher end. So
Hey, so editor's note. This is Charlie in post. We talked about non-fantasy related things for a while here, and I thought it was an interesting conversation to have. But if you're here for fantasy, I'm going to leave a link in the description just to skip all this interesting stuff. But it was a fun conversation, so I wanted to have it. Feel free to skip. So what do you think is the better path? Because like, okay, you get a kid and he's clearly smart
yeah.
and he's going through the
Hmm.
public school system, and the public school system is a joke. And even like to a certain extent, you could put him in a private school and it's still kind of a joke. And that kid can like sleepwalk through school. What do you like? What do you think is the way you go? You fit you. Well, how do you handle that? Because the kid's gonna be bored. He's gonna start to hate school, and he's
Yeah.
gonna be he's so on one hand you put him through the normal system, and he's gonna get bored. And
Yeah.
he starts to gonna hate school and not be interested in it, and he's not gonna learn any good useful habits for going into the real world where you have to grind and you have to work hard and you have to do shit you kind of hate. But you could try to like put that kid into an accelerated learning program and make him like think and make him study and make him develop those habits. But you also put like this pressure and this like that
Uh-huh.
this kid thinks he's smart and he's internalized that he's smart. So now he's developed this identity that he's smart. And then he hits a wall at some point, whether it be school or college or a job, and he's never hit that wall. And he's like, his whole identity is that he is just better than everybody. He's
Right.
just the accelerated kid, and then he eventually gets to the point where he's not that, and he has that like identity crisis. What's the
Right.
like? Which one of those is worse to you? Like, which one would you pick as someone who isn't has a kid who's not you've got an accelerated kid? He's probably going to be pretty bright. Like, what feels better to you?
So I feel like not only because I have kids and I have to think about this stuff, but also because I'm in education and I work at a community college where I'm seeing kids right out of high school, and I have many students who have had 1350s, 1400s on their SATs and a 1.6 GPA in high school. And I've had people who have had 4 points in high school all throughout their and they're and they've gotten 900s on their SATs and they have like anxiety issues. Um, I would rather, personally, as a parent, I would rather the thought of them being bored in school and like unenthusiastic because of it, and like none of those things that you mentioned in the first part of what you said, I would ever want for any of my kids. Like, if
They're
they're
just
ever
entirely
bored in school,
disengaged. They're just disengaged
yeah,
because it's not on their level.
right. And I think it's probably, and again, I shouldn't say this because I really have not been in the situation, but my brain tells me or makes me think that it's easier to put them in the higher school or to put them in a private school or to put them in some sort of, like you say, make them a special education student of the higher end, um, and then work with them on like making friends and social issues and taking care of themselves and like home ec type stuff that's not going to be taught in those schools. Um, I would rather, but you got to be careful. I think with mental health, you got to be careful either way. I think that's the biggest thing that you have to look at. How is their mental health in whatever way you choose, and always be willing to be flexible.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case, and we might just leave this in. Fuck it, because we don't have much else to talk about.
Why not?
But
It's our podcast.
fuck
But
it,
like,
yeah.
I would say 60 to 80% of every new student that I meet with is dealing with some sort of obvious mental health issue, whether it be test anxiety, general anxiety, depression. I have students who have eating disorders. Like, I put one student in a nutrition class, and she dropped it, and she comes to me and she's like, "Yeah, I couldn't get through it. I have an eating disorder, and it just was really." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that? I wouldn't have put you in nutrition.
Okay,
Would have
new
recommended
question.
that course."
New
Yeah,
question. Okay, so now we're on
yeah,
this topic. So so mental health issues. This is one of this
yeah,
is the one fun part of the internet where like the internet has raised an awareness and shined a spotlight on a lot of things that I don't think it was shining a spotlight on previously. And I
yeah.
mental health is one of those. So do you think do you think earlier generations like people of the 40s, 50s, 60s like
Hmm.
you cite this idea like you feel like 60 to 80% of kids have some sort
Yeah,
of mental health issue. Do you feel
yeah.
like the do you think that statistic would hold up in the 40s, 50s, 60s? We just weren't aware of it at that point in time, or do you think that the internet has shined a spotlight in a way that it makes people of our generation aware of it, and instead of and it's almost they're attributing poor results
Yeah.
in their life to these things that these external factors that they can possibly like try to justify what they're getting,
Hmm.
or do you think it's just some like I said do you think it's just something that always has existed, now we're aware of it, now we can try to handle it?
I think that's a great question. I think we were the start, but then, well, my generation was the start, and then your generation got a little bit worse, and now the subsequent
Gen X,
generations.
Gen X,
Yeah,
Millennial, then down to Zoomer, because that's I think we're probably
yeah. I'm
technically both
millennial. I'm not
millennials.
Gen Xer. I'm not
I
Gen
think we're
Xer. So
I think we're technically both millennials. I give
we're
my
on the far
boss
ends of the spectrum.
shit because he's a traditional guy and he
Yeah,
definitely thinks of himself as like a Gen Xer, but I'm like, no, bitch, you are a millennial.
I I have a
You're in
friend like
this
that too.
you're in
Uh
this with
huh.
me, brother.
Yeah, and they'll deny it. No, 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 no. It's like, well, look it up. I don't care what it says. Um. So definitely we are that. I mean, again, so my generation started, and it's gotten worse in terms of. I think of our like these generations as like the WebMD generations. And when you
Everybody
have
has cancer
access
when
to
you have a
all
slight
this
headache.
information, right? So when you have access to so much information like we do at the tip of our fingers, like if you're up at 5 a.m. in bed, you can look up what the symptoms are for anything, right? And so I think that the spotlight has been shined, which is good for a lot of people. But however, there's a lot of people that it has caused almost like a hyper awareness or hyperactivity towards always thinking about these things. So in some ways it's made it better, but in some ways it's made it worse. So like you use examples like 40s or 50s. I think there were a lot of problems that people faced in the 40s and 50s that made mental health issues feel not quite as bad as today, like
Yeah,
war and
I would
hunger
say
and
that generation just
unemployment and
got out of the Great Depression. Like we're talking Great Depression era, so you literally just
yeah,
can't afford food, and then we go straight into World War II. So people, I mean,
brutal.
to answer the question, those people probably had issues. It was just PTSD from half of the fucking country being in a war,
Oh,
and
sure.
the other half having to deal with the fallout of that.
And I definitely do think you're right, and the internet's right that like back then it was underreported and we had these weird diagnosis codes, and I mean we still did bloodletting and shit like that. I mean it was I mean we've come a long way in 70 years, but I don't think it's necessarily great that we have let me rephrase. I do think it's great that we have a literally all the human knowledge at our fingertips at any given moment. I just don't like that um there is no inhibition to like look things up or look stuff up. Like I do think people having to think about answers and think about things before they do something, there's a positive and some sort of benefit to that. Um, like if you let me give you an example. So as Google Maps becomes like a thing, right? I remember back when I was first driving, um,
Oh,
when I was like,
I've heard this debate from
dude, like when I was like
a
19 or
buddy of
20,
mine.
did you say the same? Like
We've
when I
just
was 19 or
we've just
20,
lost our ability. There's just a generation that has lost their ability to understand the world spatially.
simple navigation. Yes, absolutely. When I and even I and I've experienced that. So so when I was like 20 or 21, I could get to all these different poker games without MapQuest, without Google Maps, with all that without any of that shit. And I could get to all these games that I had been to, one time in the past 12 months. You just you remembered the world spatially, like you said, a lot better than you do now. Now, I mean, I struggle to function without Google Maps. My wife literally cannot function without Google Maps. I think that's people in general. So I think that's a good example of kind of what's happened with what's happened with the ability to like look stuff up at a moment's notice. I think it's good and it's beneficial for humanity, but I definitely think you can't tell me that the ability to do that and have it be so in your face at all times doesn't give people a general amount of anxiety. Like it doesn't alleviate anxiety, it gives people anxiety. Right? Like I mean,
What do you mean about like expand upon that? Like it's just the pure amount of options that they have at their disposal
yes,
that gives them more. That's the paralysis by analysis.
paralysis by analysis. So like for driving, am I taking the quickest route? Like it's okay to take a route that you know by off the top of your head that takes 2
Oh,
minutes longer. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just going to take you 2 minutes longer. Who cares?
well, that's one of those things
For
that
a
I
lot
mean
of people, it
that's
does.
that's a comparison level thing. I get it's also another one of those things about the internet where it's made there's a lot that you people are more aware of everybody else, which in a way is good
Yeah.
because I think the Arab Spring happened because these uh, these countries were able to see democracy in other places and were like, I want that. So it's like, okay, they were able to
Yeah.
have that. But you also have the flip side of where it's like, okay, I can go on the internet, I can go on Instagram and I can see, what people are projecting their lives to be, which nobody ever loses in Vegas on the internet. You are seeing a window into what people want to show you, which is the best thing, which
Uh-huh.
gives which makes it which people are like, oh fuck, am I like I'm seeing that and I look at my life and I'm not at that point, so I feel bad about myself. Whereas back in the day, you don't have that window. You literally just have real conversations with your neighbor or your coworker, and you really that's all
Yep.
you see. But
Like
yeah,
your window, I was just talking with somebody about this. Like your bubble, your window is as big or small as you let it be. And most people let it be very, very big, especially like in our fantasy leagues. To tie this into fantasy, I mean, we make our bubbles, our social bubbles over the internet, like very, very big typically. Like we're in all these leagues, we talk to all these people, and we have the ability to communicate with people from Iowa whenever we want, right? And so the more you increase the bubble in general, or increase that window that you're looking out of, the more information you're bringing in, or the more information you're I don't know if this is the right word, but susceptible to. And again, I think it's paralysis but everything gets magnified. Like everything gets turned up to 1,000. Things that are minute tend to be just magnified so heavily when you do that, I think.
yeah. It's weird that it's a very weird effect of the internet where, like you said, your bubble can be as big or small as you want it to be, but it's also your virtual bubble tends to, in my experience, shrink your real life bubble. Like obviously, like
Yeah,
tons of
yes.
people, we play with tons of people on Sleeper, and there's people in There's people in foreign countries. There's people. I've played with someone in Australia. I think I'm in the draft with someone who's in Europe right now. We play with people all over the state, all over the United States. And of my last 5 places I've lived in the last like 5 years, I have not knocked on my neighbor's door once.
There you go.
Which is
I
that
talk with people. I talk with people in real life a lot less because I talk with people in virtual fantasy world more.
Yeah, which is bad because
As
like
messed up as that is,
I've had to go out of my way to start doing things outside my house because one, my job is I work with like five other people, and they're all dudes
yeah, you
that
don't
are
work
kind
with
of
a lot
older
of people.
they're all dudes with families, so it's like that's a very limited subset of people to talk to, and that it doesn't expand out. So I've literally had to go out of my way to start going to things like, doing like run clubs in the evening and like going to a rock climbing gym, so I can literally start to try to like talk to people my age and like try to expand that physical bubble out a little bit, because I just have not done it in any way, shape, or form for like the last like 3 years.
That I'll tell you, and as you get older, and as you like when
It gets worse.
when you do have kids, it gets worse because
You're locked into what your kids are doing, right? You basically become friends.
you're
Your only subsection of friends is your kids' friends' parents, basically, right?
You know what's funny is I've not experienced that. I'm sure I will experience that when the kids are older and they have more friends and they have more of a social
And
life and whatnot. I have a buddy
become a
who
professional
I have a
chaperone.
buddy. Yeah, so I was going to say that. So I have a buddy who has 3 kids, and they're all like 3 to 5 years older than my kids. And yeah, he's a programmer, and he works like he works actually like 3 a.m. to like 7 a.m. So he works for 4 hours, grinds it out super hard. He gets up at like 7:30 with his kids. He takes them to school, comes home. He lives on a golf course. He does a little bit of work or goes golfing. He picks them up from school. He chaperones them from 3 o'clock to like 8 o'clock. Then he goes plays poker from like 9 o'clock to like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And then he grinds it out till 7 at work. Then he so I don't, who even knows when he sleeps.
I missed the sleep.
But yeah,
I missed the sleep part of that schedule.
I don't know where the sleep part of that schedule is, but so he is basically, he works like 4 hours a day and he chaperones 4 hours a day.
That's fucking wild.
I don't think that's the right ratio, but yeah, so you end up chaperoning a ton. You end up but I don't know if that's true. I'm assuming that's true, but I have not luckily got to experience that. I do like a lot of, like when I go pick up my son from kindergarten, all the parents like wait outside, and I know them, a lot of them, like, we see the same faces over and over. So I've talked to them. I've been to a few birthday parties.
Have you seen the lady that slammed the door in your face again?
The lady that slammed the door in my face. Now, wait, hold on. I have a
you
bad memory. I'm sure.
You told the story, I think, a few weeks ago, where it was raining and you had your thing has key card access, so the lady
at daycare.
closed the door on you in daycare. Yeah.
So this is gonna make me look bad. So I've seen her one time, and you were
petty. And you were petty. I know the end. I know the end of this story.
You already know the answer. You already know how this is going to. I could have made the door that was on the hinge. I could have made it so it would have stayed open, and by the time she got to the door, I did not. I'll just be honest with you. I did not do that. I did not do that. She can punch in her code like she made me punch in my code.
She set the rules of engagement.
That's exactly right.
I want to go back to a topic from a few topics ago. So you mentioned the idea you'll have students that come in, and there will be one subset of students that will have a 4.0 and like 1,000 a 4.0 GPA and 1,000 SAT, and there will be like another subset that'll have like a barely a 2, maybe less, but they'll have like a 1,350, 1,400 SAT, which is like 90th percentile or more.
Correct.
Yep. This is a very general question, so it might just need a general answer. But which one would you rather hire for a routine mid-level job?
It is a general question. I feel like it's a difficult question though. So I would lean towards the person who got the much higher SAT score.
You think?
I think what's interesting is I think as a society we've gone away from putting a lot of stock into general testing like that, into these like broad um, SAT, ACT. In Michigan we had the MEP, now we have something else, but like we've gone away from that, especially after the pandemic. Like colleges didn't even, I mean, my college doesn't even care if you have that. And a lot of universities really don't anymore either. So
That's interesting.
here's my
Like just
issue.
standardized testing in general.
Standardized testing in general was on fire 10 years ago. And after
Oh,
the
I know.
pandemic, it's
I got into college
become,
because of it, basically.
yeah, it's become obsolete. Like, they'll have you do, like colleges will have you do like their own version of standardized testing because they view it better, or they'll use strictly your high school GPA, or a combination of other things. When you're an advisor, you try to use like multiple measures, right? So like everyone has a certain amount of data points. Some have one, some have four. And in my mind, when I'm seeing a student, it's like an average. But, you know, the reason I don't like and I don't put a lot of stock into high school GPA, which is funny because my college now wants me to use exclusively high school GPA to place people. The problem is there's two problems, at least in Michigan.
There's
So
a lot
the
of
first problem,
context
which I
that's
think is
missing
happening,
just from. There's a lot of context
yeah.
from each school that you're missing by just going off of their GPA, I imagine.
Oh my God, much so. Like it'd be one thing if you were using it to like you were averaging their math scores and then using that like that metric, that GPA, that average GPA to place people in a certain math class. But like when you're saying overall GPA, like if somebody's got like a 3, it's actually 2.8. If somebody gets a 2.8 or better, we've deemed them to be college level. And as a general idea or a general metric, I think that's not good. It's frankly horrible.
Well,
But
yeah, a
like the
2.8
problem
leaves a lot
is
of the 2.8 leaves a lot of room for someone to have a C minus in math and a B plus in or an A plus in literature.
you've nailed it. You've nailed
Like
it. So the
a
idea
2.8.
that,
If
and
the bar was like 3.2, it's like okay, the spread can only be so low. But like you by a 2.8, you've made it. So you've given a lot of room for the student to be really good in one thing and really shitty in another thing.
absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think I speak for all advisors, at least in my college. I mean, we hate it. We don't like it. It's, there's people who view, um, and we've talked about this before, like, prereqs and things like that. And at my school, it's like open enrollment, no prereqs, all this different shit. And when something is a barrier, we just, at my school, we take it down. But barriers are being eroded across the country. But there's some barriers, I think me and you both agree, that are good, that are helpful, that, um, make people rise to the occasion. Like it gets something out of people they didn't know they had sometimes.
Well, there's
Um,
also
but
I think I
yeah,
almost wonder because I understand what you mean in the idea that like barrier like because barriers are good I think in general just because like you said it gives you something to actually to strive for, it gives you something to overcome, but I also think it's really for just a practical society I think it's a good idea to have barriers in terms of education because if you don't create the barrier in education, they're going to find the barrier in real life. And when they find the barrier in real
yep,
life, if you've never created that barrier, well, like best case scenario is they've never hit a barrier and they just don't know how to handle a barrier. Worst case scenario is they've never been presented a barrier and now they're learning practically that they just can't do it, and they are learning that while they're on
correct.
the job. And now they're having to try to make a living and they're hitting this functional barrier. And now you're harming this kid's ability to live. Whereas if you presented this kid a barrier in
Hmm.
college when it's in your state, it's free and they have a chance to like learn it and figure and find their way in the world, you've put them in a
Hmm.
better position long term to succeed in terms of life. Because there's just reality. You're gonna have a hard time
Correct.
becoming an
You're right.
engineer if your IQ is 90. Like it's just a reality.
That it is. But like if I was to present that to upper management at the college I work at, that would be unacceptable. Like, so they've determined that basically if a state like my state, the state of Michigan, gives somebody a high school diploma, we deem them to be like they've deemed them to be college ready. And no matter what they say they want to do, whether it be engineer, nurse, doctor, garbage disposal, whatever, garbage picker upper, it does not matter. Like we get them on the track that they need to go. And whether they pass or fail, it's on them. But like you're right, like we've removed these barriers early on, and it's just moved the barrier. It hasn't eliminated them. It just moves the barriers in their life to more important places.
More dangerous places.
But realistically, and again, I work for a college. I shouldn't be thinking like this. Or shouldn't be even saying this. But like, it's moved the barrier to a place that allows people to spend the most money at school, right? Like the barrier, like to engineering. If they hit that barrier, they might go to a trade school and do something completely different. But if you don't remove, if you remove that barrier and you move that barrier down the line, you allow them to take Calc 1, fail it 3 times. You allow them to take general chemistry and fail it twice. And that just brings in more money for the school. I hate to say it.
No, I think that's that it's tough to be cynical, but it is a reality. I think to answer my own question, I would because it's tough because when you get the kid with a high GPA but low SAT, the implication is they are a better producer, they are a more organized individual than they are overall intelligent. The kid who has intelligence, the kid who has a higher standardized test score and low GPA, it implies that they are overall smarter,
Sure.
but their study skills are poor, their interest is poor. So I think hypothetically, I would rather also probably take the kid with a high SAT score. But what I would do is I would probably, if I would want to find out what that kid likes, what that kid's interested in. If I was trying to hire for a job, because I'd want to make sure that what I'm asking him to do overlaps decently with what he is interested in doing. Because if it's not, he's clearly shown in high school that with his GPA, that if he's not interested in something, he's just not going to do it. And he's not had the study skills or the organizational skills to overcome that difficulty. And it's not going to be a pleasant time for either of us. Whereas the person with the person with a good GPA is shown they have the organizational skills. The shitty part about our school system is it's more of a factory worker producer than a critical thinker producer. But at least if the kid is shown that they can do the 4.0 GPA and do that, they've shown that they can kind of fit into that role of like, you're going to do what I tell you and you're going to figure it out. But it's shitty either way.
Like, my biggest issue with because I would normally default and think kind of how you think of it. The problem is that high schools, and I'm sure it's across the country, it's definitely in Michigan, the grade inflation is so bad. I mean, you got every teacher.
That's an education-wide thing, by the way. I saw a graph at one point, a little while after the pandemic, that overall ACT scores of all subjects had dropped a little bit, and the grades given out had risen pretty substantially. So, as a society, we're testing worse, but getting better grades, just because COVID threw everything out of whack.
There you go. And that actually is something that I've brought to my upper management on why we should not be using high school GPA to place people. It's not that, I mean, it's a bad way to do business anyways and advise people and place people, but also it's because it's not accurate. It's like after the pandemic especially, people were just allowed to pass high school with whatever their assignments were, whatever their grades were. It was like, hey, they went through this horrible thing and they had these online classes which were really weird. Get them through. And then also in Michigan, the governor, I believe it was the governor, signed a bill like a few years back where now financial literacy, this like rarely used math class, could be used as a senior level math to graduate them. And now almost every senior takes financial literacy. So it goes Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Financial Literacy. Whereas in my time, it was always Algebra 1, geometry, right? Algebra 2, pre-calc, always. And so when somebody doesn't have pre-calc, right? Like when somebody doesn't have pre-calc, which is like college intermediate algebra, when they don't have that and they say they want to do something in STEM, that's where like oh God, it's so bad for everybody. It's just so bad for everyone.
Which is so funny because the one thing I wanted more than anything was financial literacy to be an acceptable math class in high school, because I think functionally speaking, it's more valuable across the board to students than pre-calculus. But in this scenario, this is the backlash of like, if you want to become an engineer, you probably want pre-calc over financial literacy.
In high school, you do.
So it's,
but see, I don't think they get advice like that.
No. Well, that's the problem. Is I
don't think parents know. It's not parents' fault. It's not I just don't think they're being advised correctly.
And that's the tough part about using like a GPA instead of like a standardized score as a way of measuring students, because again, it's like a high school GPA. If you're trying to compare two high school GPAs across each other, they're not normalized for what they're not relative to that high school. Like if you had a student's high school GPA and their high school's average GPA sitting in front of you for both students, so you could realize, okay, this kid's on above average for his high school versus this kid's on average for his high school. So that's okay. I would rather have a kid that's above average. But it's like if you get a 3.5 and a 4.0, that doesn't really tell you a lot. Whereas like a standardized score
doesn't tell you anything.
A standardized score tells you is normalized across all students. It's just a flat. What does this kid know, or what is this kid able to figure out on a test? The
problem though is there's no incentive for students to do well on their SAT and ACT, and I say that knowing what you're going to say. Like, yes, there's incentive if you are an upper achieving student, you want to get into a certain college, there's absolutely incentive. But for the median student nowadays, where, like I said, most colleges, especially JUCOs, are advising and taking people willy-nilly. They're advising people and taking people who just have any sort of GPA, any sort of high school transcript. There's really no incentive for these students. Like, the difference for them between an 1150 and a 980 is literally nothing. It will not change their lives in any sort of tangible way. So, like, you're under the assumption, you're making these great points, and I agree with you, with the assumption that people are at least giving 90% on these tests, which I don't think is the case.
That's fair.
Like, when somebody comes in with a 4.0 GPA from one of our affluent high school areas that I know is relatively tough, and it's an area that just puts out STEM people and programmers and engineers, and that's because that's what their parents do and that's what they're been taught to do. And then you look at their SAT score and it's like a 790 or an 850. I'm like, wait a second. Tell me what really happened. Oh, I smoked a doob the night before and got 2 hours sleep. It's like, okay, well, that explains that. That happens a lot. That happens a ton.
I believe it. Now let's try to swerve away from a life topic into a fantasy. Let's try to like hijack this for a brief time back into the fantasy realm, and just try not to completely clickbait people with the title of the podcast. We've been doing a startup. I'm gonna try to avoid giving too many details, because I do want, on the very unlikely chance that somebody in the league comes across it, I don't want them to figure out that we're in it. But I called you Kulak, and your name, your sleeper name.
My handle is Kulak.
So that's out the window. Never mind. So we're in this Dynasty startup, and it's actually a pretty high stakes one for us. We dabble in the $25 to $50 buy-in realm. This is a $250 buy-in realm. So this one's pretty expensive, and not to toot my own horn, but I will say we killed it. Kulak's killed it with the trades as normal, just trading willy-nilly all over the place. So we have our 12th. We have our next pick that we are on the clock for. are 1202. The people before the guy before us took someone you actually really wanted, which I did not expect to get picked, which was Marvin Mims. So we're sitting here. We've got multiple. We've got our two quarterbacks. So there's a This is a weird league. So it's high buy-in and it's weird. It's got two quarterbacks. Yep. It's super flex. It's got two tight ends and tight end premium. So tight ends are wildly valuable in this league, which is going to prompt our next discussion. Who do we want to pick here? Do we want to pick? I think we talked about the idea of maybe going like a Curtis Samuel, just kind of lock in because we need a fourth. We need a kind of a backup.
Yeah, we
wide
only have
receiver
3
at this
wide
point.
receivers. Yeah. So I mean, I kind of felt like Marvin Mims. What's interesting is he's not trading high on like KTC and fantasy calc, but I feel like in a lot of the markets in a lot of my leagues, he is always asked about.
As someone who
with some of the
someone
obvious
who
moves.
as someone who owns
Yeah.
Marvin Mims in almost all of your leagues, his fantasy calc's not high because this is the downside of fantasy calc. Fantasy calc needs trades to happen for data points to become a thing. So if somebody's just a giant hold, their values deflated a little bit. So people who have Mims probably aren't moving Mims. So if the result of what his value is not shown up yet. But with all the things that have developed into him being definitely sought after, like you said.
For sure. Yeah. And so we're on the clock and we have 3 wide receivers and we have to start 3. We have 2 tight ends, we have to start 2. We have what do we have? 3 running backs. What's that?
Relatively old. I say that. We have Bijan,
relatively old team.
We got Bijan, Kyron, Swift, Tyreek, DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah, our team's kind of old.
And Kyler and Brock are not old, so
no,
it just feels.
Best case scenario, those are 2 quarterbacks for a decade.
Yeah, it just feels old for some reason. But we definitely need a solid wide receiver 4. There's no one particularly great on the board. I had Mims, but he's gone.
I think your best. I think you've mentioned Curtis Samuel. I think so Mike Williams is on the board. And I think he's a really. Yep. I think he's a really interesting idea because Mike Williams in his last 2 years, the games he plays, he's a wide receiver. He's a high end wide receiver too. He's literally I think averages like 15 points per game. He's great. Which is equivalent to Olave essentially. He's been a high end wide receiver 2 in the games that he's played. Now he's played basically almost a full season across the last 2 seasons. So while he has the upside and has the production, he's not going to really help us in terms of we have our wide receivers, Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. We need a fill-in. So that kind of leaves the idea of we could go Tyler Lockett. We could go Curtis Samuel, like you said, and that's really about it because then you're getting into the Burks, QJs, Wandales, Wicks, Bateman, who are all interesting, but I don't think really fit the bill of what we need.
I think, honestly, at this point in the draft, I think the best thing to do is, we need a receiver. But see, I look at these receivers, and I don't think anyone is going to go in the next few picks that we just absolutely love. Like, who do we love here? Almost no one. So I think what we should be doing is trying to trade down from this pick.
We could. It's not a bad idea to just get more depth if you can manage it. You've managed it the whole time, but you know what we could do? We could take Ford. We could take Ford.
Take Ford what?
Take Ford.
Oh, Ford?
Yeah. Lock in that Cleveland running back. Lock in that Cleveland running back. Come back in a few picks. Take our wide receiver 4. Come back on the wraparound and take our tight end 3. And I think we're in a really good
man.
spot
I almost want to
go.
I'm nervous Hunter Henry is just going to, like you said, randomly go, and we're going to be like, shit. We should have took him.
Would you like to explain why we want Hunter Henry, a player whose ADP is 100 lower than where we're picking right now? Because the audience is going to be like, why do these dudes are in the 12th round and they want Hunter Henry? Why are we listening to this podcast?
So it's 14 man, and so already you have people fighting for the top 28 tight ends, just to even have 2 startable ones. Yeah, 2 tight end league, and it's super tight end premium. So even if you were to overdraft a third, you could still flex them and feel really good about it. Um, and so we got lucky, right? In what was it, the 4th and 5th round, back to back, we took
Third and
Kelsey
fourth.
and Hawkinson.
Third,
Third
fourth,
and fourth. Third and fourth.
Kelsey, then Hawkinson. Yeah.
And what was nice about that is very shortly after that went, what did I say? Like 9 tight ends in the next 2 rounds?
Starting at the 504, 9 tight ends went in the next 13 picks. It went Ferguson, Komet, and Njoku, Metcalf, Bryce Young, and then Ingram, Kittle, Mayer, Schultz. And then you go Addison and Reed, and then Goddard, Freiermuth went. So 9 tight ends in 13 picks. There was a
That Freiermuth, is that at the end of the 5th? When is that?
Start at the 6th. Yeah, 602 Pat Freiermuth.
Start of the 6th. Like, like four. When did we take Kelsey and Hawkinson? Like 412 and 52.
It was 312 and 43. So it was early. Like
I'm sorry, I keep switching the rounds.
Yeah, you're giving us a lot of credit. No, we didn't get that good value.
We don't deserve that much credit.
We quote unquote reached for Kelsey and Hawkinson, but I think for this format it was perfectly fine to take them where we did. But it was definitely so you get this point where like you need a tight end 3. Well, you would rather have a tight end 3 than not, especially because Hawkinson is our tight end 2. So we do need a tight end that starts the year. We have a relatively old team, so we need someone who can hold it down for ideally a few years. And Hunter Henry signed recently, I think in this offseason, his 3-year, $27 million contract. So in theory, I don't know what the guarantees are on that. I'd have to load up on SpotTrack. But in theory, he's going to be there for a few years. He's going to have, in theory. Now, again, this is the tough part about this entire draft, outside of the fact that it's a weird format with a lot of people, is that it's happening a month before the draft, approximately a little less, a little more than a month before the draft. So there's a lot of running backs positions that feel unstable, especially at this point. There's some wide receiver positions that feel unstable. There's some quarterback positions that feel unstable, but there is the lingering Brock Bowers pick that could destroy somebody. But I feel reasonably confident that the Patriots are going to wind up with a quarterback. So Brock Bowers is about to get, or Hunter Henry is about to get a really good QB quarterback upgrade. He's locked into a spot for a few years, and he doesn't have all that much competition for targets because if the Patriots pick a quarterback, they're not picking one of these top wide receivers. So he's in a good spot, and like we said, we need somebody to fill in, and the
you really do in 2 tight end.
Well, it's one of those things. I think people in this draft have underestimated the idea that like you said, your tight end 3, like it's a perfectly good flex, especially in a league this deep, to just flex another tight end. It's actually
absolutely,
if you can manage to get 3 really good tight ends in this league, you're basically breaking the league because in a super tight end premium, an elite tight end is scoring like 18 points per game, like if not more. I think Kelsey in his heyday was averaging like 25 points per game. So like these tight ends, you could get a third tight end and flex him and outscore other people's quarterbacks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like even just thinking about a guy. So last year in one of my 2 tight end leagues, I felt great. I went in with Goddard and Freiermuth, and I don't know if people remember Freiermuth's. I don't know if people remember the buzz around Freiermuth. He had just come off a really good season. Like I get that there was Matt Canada's offense was being brought back, but I mean there was a lot of buzz around him. He was going around in a lot of our leagues around like he's worth like a 110, 1.9, something like that. He just felt really good. Like both those guys felt really good. I mean, it was an unmitigated disaster. I had to trade like an early third for Tyler Conklin halfway through the year just to have a functional team. And so like even if you overdraft like a Hunter Henry, which is like impossible because in a lot of these leagues people undervalue, like you said, the tight end position. you can still flex them and you can still trade them to. There's going to be so many desperate, needy teams halfway through the year when, a third of the tight ends suck, a couple get injured, all these different things happen. The draft happens. Bowers goes somewhere and makes somebody obsolete. So there's nothing wrong with overdrafting a tight end that you think is going to be. Now the question is, there was Hunter Henry we looked at, there was Ertz that we looked at, there was Hayden Hurst that we looked at, there was Juwan Johnson that we looked at. And I think what brought our eyes back to Hunter Henry is past success, always been a very
he's just
very
consistently
low floor, low ceiling.
Yeah, he's just a consistently really
I'm
good
sorry,
tight
medium
end.
floor, low ceiling.
Yeah, high. Yeah, I would say high floor.
Yeah, right.
In this
Like,
format, he's averaged.
Really
in this format, for his career,
format.
he's averaged 185 points per season. Which, to put that into perspective, Cortland Sutton had a really nice feeling year last year, right? He had good yards, he had some good highlights, he had good touchdowns. He scored 180 something points last year. His nice Cortland Sutton's
That's such a wild stat.
Cortland Sutton's nice season. Cortland Sutton, who went a round ago, his nice season was
much less or much higher last year.
Yeah, and it was Hunter Henry's career average in terms of points per season, which obviously the last couple
years too, to be honest with you.
Yeah, the last couple of years have been down, obviously, because he's had Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi throwing him the football, two players that are unquestionable backups in my mind. So if he gets, in theory, a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May, that's a massive quarterback upgrade. Now we don't know how well those will pan out, but I know they'll be given more reign to operate and run. So he's going to get a massive quarterback upgrade. He's already done pretty well. That's why we're picking him even in this format so high, when in a normal format
over all these players that are left.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing I will say about Hunter Henry that I like personally is, one, the consistency, but also the knock on him as being an elite tight end, or the lack thereof, is because he's so touchdown dependent. But the part I like about him is that he's always on the field in the red zone. They always have him, and I get this as a new coaching staff, it's going to be a new quarterback, a new system, all that stuff. But he's typically always on the field in the red zone.
That new coaching staff and system just signed him, so obviously they feel as strongly about him as the previous regime.
And I mean, who really is a red zone threat in that offense? Again, they're going to address some wide receiver issues probably in the draft, but they have such a bad pass catching core.
Yeah, Demario Douglas. That's pretty much it.
And that's pretty much it. There's just no one. And if I recall, isn't he a slot receiver typically?
Yeah.
So 100%. there's no, and Hunter Henry is 6'3", 6'4", something like that. So he gives you that red zone threat while also being somebody who gets thrown to 3 to 4 times a game down the middle. And again, if a tight end gets 4 catches for 20 yards, that's 10 points. That's 10 points. That's a lot of points.
Especially in a league where this is 14 teams start 12, so you're getting to 168 starters. So yeah, he's gonna be a useful starter. We'll let that sit just because you're gonna try to send out some trades. I had a theory question that I'm curious your take on, because I try to make these trade values, and we use our system where it's okay, we just have it's fair to call them points. We call them first round picks, even though they don't really equate out to first round picks exactly, because there's a lot of range in terms of what a first round pick is valued at. But in theory, the average first round pick is worth 1 first round pick, and then you just scale off of there. Some classes, those fluctuate, and it gives you a good sense of the value of the class. And I guess the question I would have, and I'm curious your thoughts, because I've been trying to put some thought into this, because we're going through this pretty deep draft, and you have to, when you're trying to make trades floating around this draft, you have to kind of adjust, because the way I always have it is my values are normalized to a 12-team start 11. So it's the way I always do my kind of, I try to keep my values in a good place, is I have landmarks for where at certain point, basically at the end of each round, I have a landmark for how much a player should be valued. And the way so what I'll do is I'll order all the players based on how I value them, and then I'll just retrofit those players to those landmarks. So like the best player is around like 4, maybe 4.25. The end of the second round is like a 2.25. The end of the third round is like a 1.8. The end of the fourth round is like a 1.5-ish, and so on and so on.
Which for the people listening, I think is a great way to think about trades in general and player values and everything, because you can do it quickly. Quick math.
Exactly. So I guess the question I would have is when I want your thoughts on this, because I've been trying to put a lot of thought into it, is when you try. So obviously there's an effect of having 14, if the values are normalized for 12 teams start 11, that's 132 starters. If you're in a 14 team league start 12, you're now at 168 starters. So would you think it's better just to keep those player values the way they are? So like you just have your values for the players, and they're valued the way they are, and that you just trade around that? Or would it be better to still keep those landmarks and then stretch the players, adjust the players that way? So like in a normal league, the 24th player would be like a 2.2-ish, but in a 14 team league, the 28th player would be a 2.2-ish. And so this gets more exacerbated as we get on. So it's like, okay, in a normal league, the 120th player would be around like half a first round pick. Well, you get to 120th player, that's like a early 9th, late 8th. Whereas like, okay, do we stretch it down so like the 140th player is worth half a first round pick? What do you think is the better way to go about that? Leave them the same, or kind of like stretch it out a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you imagine like player values in a startup draft as like some sort of curve, where the curve, like the first half of the curve is like eliminated, so it starts at like the top. So imagine a bell curve, and you cut off the first half, and then you place a graph on top of it, right? And so the first round is the highest, and then second, third, fourth, and then it like flattens out towards probably, where do we always say in like a 10 or 12 man it flattens out? It's usually like the 10th or 11th or 12th, something like that.
It starts to it starts to flatten out around like the 7th round, and it really starts to flatten out around like the 10th round. Yeah,
there's definitely like tier, right? Like there's tiers, so you imagine like little bumps, but then it definitely like takes a more severe dip at certain points. But I think, to your point, I think it definitely flattens out less steep. So it flattens out. It takes longer to flatten out. So, and I think initially the better players have less value. So I don't think like Mahomes or Josh Allen is worth like 4.5 firsts or whatever you want to say the top, fantasy asset is worth. I don't think they're worth quite that, because that value at the back end, because I'm saying, right, like the tail stays higher for longer in a 14-man, that value has to come from somewhere. So it probably comes from the best assets in the draft not being worth quite as much.
Well, you have to adjust for the argument. You have to adjust the idea that you have more starting slots, so that depth becomes more important as the league size gets better. It's one of the reasons why I think stretching is probably a better idea, to reflect the idea that depth is more valuable in a wider league than it is in a much shallower league.
For sure. I think the biggest takeaway is that, like, when you're assessing a trade and putting a trade adjustment value to it, the player position, and also like the numbers of player you're trading versus the numbers of player you're receiving, is going to alter the trade value way more in a league like this than like a 10-man start 11 or 12 or whatever we start and wanted.
It's all about scarcity, right? So it's like you
sure
in a normal league where like one of our leagues is a 10-team start 10. Nobody's hurting for quarterback in that league. That league's a little bit adjusted because it's a 2-quarterback league, so you that does help a little bit in terms of that scarcity. But like nobody's hurting in that league, whereas this league's a 14-team super flex. So there's going to be, once you get into bye weeks, there's going to be a lot of weeks where somebody just doesn't have a second quarterback to play, including
So,
us, because
right.
we just have Kyler and Purdy.
Yeah, we're going to be one of those teams. And so, yeah, it changes the trade adjustment to a really interesting way. Like when somebody includes a tight end, like not only is that tight end worth inherently more in this league than any other league, but also I would argue that, right, like the trade adjustment has to reflect that as well. Um, and so when you're evaluating trades, like I've not entertained one trade for any of our tight ends ever. Because in a startup format, they're going to take the value of the pick as wherever you took the pick at. So like Hawkinson at 4-3 or wherever we took him, he's worth the value of a 4-3 pick. Well, I don't think that's right. I
Wait,
think I think all
pause.
tight ends are underdrafted as the draft ends or begins to end, and as people slowly realize they effed up, whether it be they drafted one tight end or they drafted like two tight ends, one of them decent, one of them really shitty, or they only drafted two quarterbacks and they really need a third quarterback, whatever the case is. All these values of these players start to increase, and it doesn't it's all about how much you can gouge people, right? Like how desperate they are. Like you said, it's about scarcity. Um, and so, like when you draft, whether or not you agree that like Hawk is under or overdrafted at 403 in a 14-man startup with two tight ends, super tight end premium, whether he is overdrafted or undrafted, it doesn't really matter because at some point, due to positional scarcity, people are going to overpay eventually for if they want that player for a tight end or for a quarterback, but more so a tight end probably.
So I
But
guess
like you can't yeah, go ahead.
my question would be, would that affect an adjustment, or would that affect Hawkinson's value inherently? That, like, I don't think that's an adjustment question, because when I hear the word adjustment, I think the generic adjustment you attach to a trade that you'll see on my calculator or Keep Trade Cut, where it's like, okay, I need to handle, generally speaking, the idea of a 3-for-2 trade or a 2-for-1 trade, where it's like
Right.
there's some adjustment that, and some of this is just there's not a good way for these calculators to handle that in terms of like those
Oh,
imbalanced
sure.
trades. It's one of the reasons I like just our first round pick system, is it doesn't really need an adjustment.
Right.
It's just the values just straight up. But would you say that's an adjustment, or would you say that just in a format like this, Hawkinson is just worth a first round pick more than he normally would be in like a non tight end premium, no one tight end league?
I think both. I think both. I don't know. My first instinct is both. Like like I think all tight ends in this format were underdrafted. I think they're always underdrafted, especially with the super tight end premium with the 1.0 extra, because like if you overdraft them, you can always flex them, and they're almost always a better flex option than who you would have drafted in that position anyways. The problem becomes it's so volatile, right? Like there has to be, it's really hard because it's a balance between like I think all these tight ends are underdrafted. I think that they all in like when you're making a trade with somebody, they should be valued more. I think that the trade adjustment should. So not only do I think they should be worth a first more or whatever, like in Hawkinson's case, but I also think that the trade adjustment needs to reflect the positional scarcity um, of the position in general,
Of getting one and of getting one and not receiving one back.
and getting one and not receiving one back exactly. And then if it's you're getting two you're getting two players back and you're giving out three, that also has to be heavily taken into account. Um,
That's usually what
and so I think it's both.
that's usually what adjustment is for. It's usually to deal with imbalanced trades from purely a numbers standpoint, but to tack on,
But more so in
it's
a
one of those.
14 man.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's just interesting, the idea that I don't think most trade calculators, just because it doesn't have access to that much information, takes into stuff
Right.
like positional scarcity into account. It doesn't take in, what
No,
your team composition versus another team's composition looks like in
that's
terms
also
of
very
like,
important.
I think I think the only one that does a good job of that, and that's mostly just because you input. It does the best job of this. It doesn't do a good job of this. Is Fantasy Pros, where you input your league, and then it'll tell you based on based
where
on
your
your
weaknesses are.
yeah, based on what you have in terms of your team and what your opponent has, it'll tell you if it thinks both of your who it'll give you a percentage of like it thinks your team gets this much better or worse, and your opponent team gets this much better or worse. And it's funny how many trades you can try to make on that are just like, oh, both teams just get worse.
Yeah,
Both teams.
I mean,
This is nonsensical. Why are you trying this?
right. We talk about it all the time. Like, you can make trades where both teams get better. You don't have to, uh, trade wreck somebody. But yeah, I mean, so here's the hard part with trades, right? In a league like this, you come to somebody with Hawkinson. Let's use a different example. You come to somebody with Evan Ingram, okay? And I think he's undervalued in normal startups. He's going at what, like the 201, 202, 203, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. In terms of rookie picks.
And I would give
of the startup.
In rookie picks. I'm so sorry. Yeah, in rookie picks. And I would give probably 109.
109. Yeah.
Yeah, and lower.
That's what you would give.
So that's what I would give. I know normal people are not me. So, but here's the problem. So let's say that we value him at the 201 rookie pick. Or let's just say a late first, early second in general. And in this league, we're saying that all these tight ends should probably be worth, like top end, they should be worth a first more, and then that kind of levels out right at some point. But like, I don't think it's unreasonable to trade 2 late firsts for Evan Ingram in this league. Like, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that would be like, people would be like, holy shit, like that is insane. I do kind of feel like that's about what his value is. With that being said, you go to somebody and you're like, hey buddy, hey, I'm looking to trade. I'm going to give you Evan Ingram and you give me 2 late firsts. They're going to be like, whatever you bought off the streets and you're smoking, I want some. They're not going to, most people will just not give you that. And so part of it's because, well, the majority of it is because, right, like in every other league that they're in, he's just not worth that. So it's really hard to correct it. I'm sorry, let me think of how to say this. It's really hard to correctively, that can't be the right word, but analyze a player's value based on positional scarcity like this. And let's say you somehow get it right. In almost every instance, it's going to be really hard to extract that value in a trade. Because now you're relying upon random people to also understand that.
Yeah, and it also on top of the fact that every league is functionally different. So you're not none of these trades happen in a vacuum. You're making them, an overall player's cost is relative to the wide-ranging market of the overall Dynasty community. Well, your 14-team league is a different market than the overall market. It's a tiny subsection of that market where
it's a bubble within a bubble.
It's a bubble in a bubble, and because it's so small, variability can just kick in, and then you might just happen to find a league where everybody loves Ingram or nobody loves Ingram, and it either destroys or helps his cost. And that's one thing I always try to be careful of is someone's cost and their value are two different things. Their cost is what you can buy and sell them for. Their value is, in theory, how many more points they will score over replacement level over the course of time.
Correct, right? Like over their career, right? And you make a good point. It's a bubble within a bubble, and this league that we're in, that we're talking about, is in terms of tight ends on the very extreme. Right, like there's polar extremes. There's no tight end premium, start one, and that actually we're in a league where there's not even a tight end spot. It's just it's just flex. There's not even a tight end spot. Yeah, know what league I'm talking about.
Speaking of deep leagues, 32-team league.
The 32-team league, and there's no tight end spot, and like Pitts was just traded for. No, and like there was just a trade that went down where Pitts went for like. I thought what was a large amount in a... What's that?
It was the 107 for Pitts and like the 124, and then a bunch of stuff on the back end.
Which in that league is crazy because there's no tight end premium, and you don't even have to start a tight end. So like that league, Evan Ingram is worth shit. He's worth like, I mean,
that is the most
like Curtis Samuel. I have no idea.
That league is the most extreme example of the question I asked, where it's like, okay, do you stretch out these values so that they hit these landmarks? So like, okay, we were talking the difference between the 24th and the 28th player for a league like this. Should their value be the same across these leagues when you adjust for size? Well, now it's the difference between the 28th player and it's the 64th player. Is the 64th player worth 2.2 first round picks in a 32 team league? And in our league, it also changes. In that league, it also changes a little bit. That one is exceptionally difficult to value because it's 32 teams. It starts 6, thankfully, and there's just a bunch of positional weirdness. But where you I think you can get away with not even starting at QB if you don't want to, but that's not sensible.
I believe so, right?
But
so 2 leagues at the very ends of the spectrum, right? Like literally at the end of in terms of tight ends.
That league is so deep. Normally you have an if you do a 2-for-1 trade, the adjustment goes to the one side, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm giving you the better player.
Right.
I need two really good players to get to deal with that. In that league, it's so the other way. The adjustment either is 0 or in some cases it might be negative. Where it's like, no.
It might be negative, yeah.
No. I'm giving you 2 startable pieces in this start 192 league. I don't care that you're giving me Joe Burrow or Bijan Robinson.
Sure.
I need to be if I can start Joe Mixon and Amari Cooper, that's just going to leave me in a much better position than starting Bijan Robinson and Tyler
Greg
Algier.
Reynolds, like Lions' third string running back. That's how brutal it is in that league. It's like, do you want Bijan and like Tampa's like, what's his name? What's the backup running back, like Sean Tucker or whatever?
Would you like Chase Edmonds or Chase Edmonds and Bijan or Joe Mixon and Tony Pollard?
Yeah, I think the adjustment should go the other way. I think it's Tony Pollard and Joe Mixon. Yeah, it's the extreme opposite. It's really interesting. And then with tight ends, it's because I love talking about tight ends. I find tight end, the position, very interesting. I feel like it's undervalued. It's very volatile. It's kind of like gambling, which is why I like it, I think. So one last topic that's on my mind. It's something that we hold near and dear to our hearts because we've been affected negatively, mostly negatively, some positively, I think, maybe me more so than you. How much is Justin Fields worth?
Oh God, I've had as someone who is fielded, no pun intended.
There you go, no pun intended.
multiple brutal offers for Justin Fields. I'm talking. I think I got sent the
fourth.
I got sent the 212 for Justin Fields. I got sent the 205 for Justin Fields. I got sent. I wish I could get him at the value that we saw him go for in our recent startup, where he went for like the 404. But that's not happening.
What was that?
So I guess this really comes down to, okay, who do you? Because this is more near and dear to my heart. Because this is both. I own a lot of Justin Fields, and I'm also a Steeler fan. So it's like, okay, this is my fucking quarterback situation, and it really comes down to like, do you think Fields gets another chance? Or do you think he winds up being a Trey Lance? Because if you think he gets another chance, I think he's worth a late first. Now, where he gets that chance could be up in the air. I would heavily suspect he plays for the Steelers at some point this year, basically just because of based on the fact that he could just win the job outright. That is a possibility. They've been functionally very similar quality of players, and Fields is in theory ascending as a player, and Russ is decreasing as a player. So their trajectories, while they're at the same level and their trajectories are different. Russell Wilson costs basically nothing, so there's really not much of a. The only reason you'd want to keep him on the roster is just he's so cheap. So, but you're not going to be able to keep him as a backup, I imagine, because he's not going to want that. No, you might just be like, "Fuck you, we signed you. Have fun.
Probably.
You're going to be our backup for $1 million." Because in a world where Gardner Minshew is making 10 and Garoppolo is making
That's
a bunch,
good point.
you just fuck it. I'm just gonna have a good backup. But Russ also did Russ miss any game? Did Russ get missed time last year? I think he missed he missed
Maybe
week
a couple,
9, and then he got benched week 17. So he didn't really get injured too much. So
No,
Russ is pretty.
he's been pretty healthy.
Russ is pretty tough in that regard. So if I had to fight,
But there's a chance he's just bad, right? Like there's a chance he's just washed.
Russ.
His advanced metrics were not good last year. His stats were good, but his advanced metrics were not good.
No, I mean, part of that, there's a lot of things that could go into his situation. In theory, he had better coaching than he's going to have, offensive coaching than he's going to have now. But in theory, he also, he had better weapons. And then Deontay Johnson got sold for very little, which I understand. He's expensive, and there's a good wide receiver class, really good wide receiver class coming up. But to answer your question, if I had him, and I had to, if I was in a 12-team league, and I had, if I just I'm just going to get rid of him. I think the lowest I'd probably sell would be like a 202, like an early second.
That feels right. That feels right. Like when you said you got offered the 204, I'm like, that's not that bad. Like in a 10-man, I would take that probably.
But it's really tough.
It's such an interesting question because it's so polarizing. Like he's such a polarizing figure anyways, or player anyways, but now that his value has dropped dramatically.
He's always been polarizing. I think at the end of the day, he's a buy.
Yeah, go ahead.
To me personally, he's a buy. If you get him for an early second, if you can get him for an early second, you take him.
And the player above him, so not only is Fields volatile, but Russ is volatile too. And he went to the team that literally benched their starter for poor play last year.
If there's anybody who has the balls to do whatever the fuck he wants and has the institutional buy-in to do so, it's Mike Tomlin.
Yep. Agree 100%. I think Fields is a buy. I think he's a good buy at 202. I would now here's the thing. There are I think I have one share left. If somebody offered me the 202, I would heavily think about taking it. But there are other leagues where I'm like rebuilding where I would really heavily think about sending the 202 for. So it really depends on how your team looks and if you need a quarterback, if you're rebuilding. But like 202 to me is that spot where it's like it both feels good and bad depending on which side you're on.
Yeah, I agree. But I think like you put it best. It comes down to if you're rebuilding, buy Fields. If you need to contend, and you can get like a late first, early second in value, just go ahead and pull the trigger and just be like, okay, well that was a loss, but I'm not going to sunk cost fallacy my way to a championship.
Exactly, that's exactly right, and that's a good theme that I think we hammer on quite a bit. That I think we should continue. Like, when you're competing, all hands are off. Like, don't sell your future. Don't, sell every pick that you have for an extra 5% chance to win. Don't do something drastic like that. But like if you're actively competing, you don't know what the next 2 or 3 years are going to look like. Like it may not be, you may not just have a chance. Like something may happen. Both your quarterbacks may have, may get Justin Fields did. You just don't know what, you say you were coming out of last year and you had Fields and Sam Howell and you're like, hey, Sam Howell was like QB9 and Fields was like QB8 or 10 or whatever he was. Like, I feel pretty good. Like they're both young. Like they both don't look too bad, at week 12. And then in the offseason, you're like, well, that's it. My dynasty run is over. Like I've just lost 3 firsts in value. I don't know what I'm going to do. Right. And so you think about like rebuilding and whatever. So if you have a team and it's, you're able to keep it intact and you're able to get that late first or early second in value from Fields and you can turn it into something that you can turn it into Evan Ingram, for instance. I think you got to go out and you got to do it and you got to bite the bullet. But if you're rebuilding, you should do the opposite.
One more topic, because I think this is we've done this startup, and I think it's a good preview into next week where I want to talk about our rookie rankings ahead of the draft. But in a similar vein, it really feels like people are really overvaluing some picks and really undervaluing some other ones. Because it's always a weird situation where you get into a startup draft and like how people are going to handle those rookie picks, because it feels like it just could be all over the place. Either it's just a bunch of new players that either love the just want to get youth and just not understanding it, or they just don't understand the players, so they shy entirely away, or it's older players who just tend to prioritize the idea of having stable vets, and rookies kind of go by the wayside. But I feel like we're getting into this draft where the top like 7-8 picks are getting overdrafted a little bit, and then you get to picks like 9 through 15, and they're getting underdrafted a little bit. Like once you get out of that top 7, people really don't know how the rest of the draft looks, and I think that's something to be taken advantage of in the next month.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it. You brought it to my attention, and you're 100% right. I think looking back in all drafts, I think that happened. I think the Dynasty community has been hammering home the tier break being at what, like
7.
Rookie pick 8, 7, something like that. So
Depends on how you feel about JJ and Brian Thomas Jr., but it's like 7.
yeah,
8.
if you feel like they're coming into the bubble, right? But 7. So but I mean, and we both talked about this like off pod at one point. Like it's gonna probably flatten out at some point. Like there won't be a stark tier difference probably. Like once once the actual NFL draft happens and people get, really good landing spots and people move up, and like the Chargers get Blake Corum, and you're like, oh man, like, Gus Edwards is kind of old, kind of banged up, not that good. Blake Corum's going to be awesome. He was, at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. Like I could imagine him like ascending to some degree, especially with how bad so landing spots matter. I just imagine that tier being flatter than it is currently. And I think every Dynasty outlet, other pods, things they see on Twitter, they keep hammering this tier. And so people get through 7 or 8 and they're like, you know what? Vet from now on. So
I missed the boat. Now I'm just going to go, George Pickens, Joe Mixon, Pacheco.
Which is not bad at first, right? Like you always want to be the start of the run on something.
Because then you wind up getting the guy fall. You wind up getting the guy falling because the run happened.
So we started the run on tight ends in this draft that we're currently in, right? So when it came back to us, what was it, 37 picks later or whatever it was? When it came back to us, well, now all these mediocre tight ends got overdrafted, you could say, or appropriately drafted, and we got our guys underdrafted or whatever. But like then the wide receivers and running backs that were available to us were not available. We did not think they would be available to us, right? Like, and so now we're able to extract value from that. And so if you can start the run, if like all these rookie picks, like 5 through 8 go like pick, and then you're the first person to take a vet, and then you got 20 people taking vets, you should feel good about not only the value you got from the vet at the start, but also who you're going to be able to draft then as maybe a rookie on the back end on that next pick.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, I think people are really underestimating how flat the next, like once you get past that tier of like the top 7, 8, I think people are really underestimating how flat that tier of the next like 8, 9 guys are, where it's like, it's very reminiscent of the 2022 draft class, where the 22 class had, it's almost like a weird mix of like the 2021 class and the 2022 class, because you've got these wide receivers where there's like 3 elite ones, and then there's just a lot of really interesting bets, but they're not like locked in like outstanding bets. So you've got that tier of Garrett Wilson, and like in 2022 you had the Drake London, Garrett Wilson. I think Burks kind of fell into that tier, which shows you how sometimes that just doesn't work out. And in this one, you have Marvin, Odunze, and Neighbors. And then like that 2022 class, you had the Olave, Jameson, Dotson, Sky Moore, Pickens, Christian Watson tier, where all these are like decent coin flips, and some of them pan out and some of them really don't pan out. I think people are underestimating how much this class is like that, where it's like, okay, once you get past that top 3, Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, and all these guys, they're Keon Coleman, they're all good bets, but none of them stand out too much to me.
A sure thing, right?
Yeah.
And don't you think it's going to be really interesting in that draft to see what the landing spots for some of these mid-tier quarterbacks are, like the J.J. McCarthy's, Penix, people like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's going to make or break some of these players because I think whoever goes to the Vikings is in an outstanding spot. I think
Yep.
whoever goes to the Broncos is in a reasonably good spot, and I think if you go to the Raiders, you're kind of fucked.
You go to the Raiders, yeah, and we were talking a little bit about this. That, like, I mean, Gardner Minshew is one of the better backups in the league. Like, you're probably drafting like some sort of like developmental prospect where they're probably going to be sitting for a year, maybe two, right? I don't want to say it's going to be like Jordan Love-esque, but it's going to be probably a substantial amount of time. I don't think it's going to be like 4 games. I think Gardner Minshew can win you enough games where like they're going to be sitting at like 2-2 or 3-1 or like a very competitive 1-3. They're not going to bench him in favor of a rookie, I don't think.
Yeah, it's possible.
I am wrong a lot.
It's there's a lot. That's the like we said. It's the tough part about drafting a month before the or doing a startup a month before the real life draft because there's just so much that could happen. Just like there was a ton of shit that happened in free agency that was wild. There's a ton of wild things that are going to be unpredictable about the draft. But I think with that long-winded episode, I think that is going to do it for this week's edition on a Saturday morning where we're going to have these going forward.
Yes, and next time they'll probably be more structured, but it was nice to have an off plan format for once, and I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate everyone listening, and I appreciate everyone. I appreciate actually Dicey being cool with changing the times. It's nice to have a partner that's willing to be flexible. So
it's easy to be flexible when our time was Tuesdays at 9 p.m. after work.
That's true.
It's not like
That's
this
true.
got. It's not like I picked something all that much worse for me.
Well, I do appreciate it, and again, thanks to everyone for listening.